Daniel Whitmore was the kind of man people envied from across the street, across the city, and sometimes even across the world. His name echoed through the business elite like some sort of living legend, sharp, untouchable, dangerously brilliant. CEO of Whitmore Enterprises, worth over $300 million, with a smile that could melt through the coldest negotiation table and eyes that never missed a decimal. He had it all: wealth, power, and a family that looked perfect in every Christmas card they mailed out. But Daniel had grown tired. It wasn't the board meetings, or the endless travel, or even the way people kissed up to him. It was something far more personal, a doubt that crept into him late at night when the house was too quiet, and the lights from the city flickered in through the curtains like whispers of truth. Did they love him? Caroline, his wife of 19 years, she'd been with him since the early days, though not the beginning. Not the real beginning, when Daniel lived in a cramped two-bedroom with his alcoholic father and raised his younger brother Cole like a parent would. She came into his life just as things were taking off. He met her at a fundraiser. She wore red that night, not a dress, a warning. Now, nearly 2 decades later, she wore Chanel to the kitchen, treated maids like statues, and scrolled on her phone more than she looked him in the eye. Their son Mason, just 17, was already being groomed as next in line. Daniel loved him with a fierce tenderness, but he also couldn't ignore how Mason spoke more about profits and inheritance than compassion or values. Like he was being raised in a boardroom, not a home. Then there was Cole, Daniel's younger brother, always broke, always needing help. Daniel never hesitated to write a check, cover the rent, pay off the gambling debt. But lately, Cole acted less grateful and more entitled, like Daniel owed him for being family. It ate at him. So one sleepless night, Daniel did something insane. He called his personal attorney, Mason Marks, and told him to leak fake documents to the media, emails, reports, fabricated whistleblower complaints, a controlled demolition of Whitmore Enterprises, carefully staged. Stocks would tumble, headlines would flare. The company would collapse, but in truth, it would be quietly held in trust, legally protected under a web of shell corporations and foreign accounts. He wanted to disappear from his empire, not to run from it, but to test what he built his life on. His family. Caroline didn't know. Neither did Mason or Cole. The news broke on a Monday morning, and within hours, Daniel made sure his accounts appeared frozen, assets seized, cards declined. He played the role of a desperate, disgraced millionaire beautifully. He watched the color drain from Caroline's face when she read the news at the breakfast table. Her hand trembled, holding her gold-rimmed coffee mug, as she looked up at him and whispered, "Is this real?" Daniel nodded. "I lost everything." She didn't ask how he was feeling. She didn't come around the table to hug him. She asked, "So, are we going to lose the house too?" And that's when he knew this experiment needed to happen. He moved fast, told her the government was seizing everything and the press was going to eat them alive. They needed to leave, disappear, go somewhere no one would find them, live like regular people until he figured something out. She didn't fight it. No tears, no pleading, just quiet packing, heavy silence, and the occasional annoyed sigh when she couldn't bring more than one suitcase. They left the mansion that night. Daniel drove a beat-up Corolla he had paid for in cash, leaving his Bentley behind. The ride was long, and Caroline didn't say much, just stared out the window like she was watching a bad dream unfold. They arrived at a rundown 2-bedroom house in a neighborhood where the air smelled like mildew and regret. It belonged to an old friend from Daniel's childhood, someone who owed him a favor. The fridge barely worked, the shower dripped non-stop, and the walls carried the voices of every neighbor on the block. Caroline stood in the middle of the tiny living room, high heels tapping against the warped wooden floor, and asked, "Is this really where we're staying?" "This is what we can afford now," Daniel said. "No hotels, no friends, no one to call me tea." No one left. She didn't cry. She just walked to the sofa, sat down, and stared ahead like she was waiting for someone to change the channel on her life. Daniel spent the next few days trying to adapt. He shaved with a dollar store razor, walked 4 blocks to get groceries, and told Caroline he'd found a temporary dishwashing job at a local diner. She didn't ask for details. She just said, "Try to be back before dark. It's not safe here." Each night, Daniel came back, cooked what little they could afford, and watched his wife shrink into someone he didn't recognize. She wore less makeup, but also smiled less. She didn't cuddle, didn't touch him. She took long walks, to clear her mind, she said, but she'd come back smelling like perfume he hadn't seen her wear since their honeymoon. The 6th night, she came back late. Very late. Daniel had been sitting in the dark for over an hour, lights off, thinking. He heard her heels on the steps, then the soft jingle of keys. When she walked in, she jumped. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" she asked. "I was thinking," he said. She didn't respond, just slipped off her heels and walked past him, straight to the bedroom. That night he lay beside her but felt like he was miles away, and for the first time in years, he wondered if he ever really knew the woman beside him. The next morning, Daniel woke up to the sound of running water and the faint hum of Caroline humming a song he didn't recognize. He sat up slowly, confused, for a second by the peeling wallpaper and the smell of stale carpet. Then he remembered where he was, who he was pretending to be, what he was doing. Caroline came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, looking fresher than she had in days. "You're up early," she said, drying her hair without looking at him. He rubbed his face. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." She nodded and walked past him, her eyes fixed on her phone. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Too quickly. Just tired of all this. Daniel watched her fingers move across the screen, typing something fast, then pausing, then deleting. She didn't think he noticed, but he did. He noticed everything now, every change in her tone, every secret glance, every fake smile. Later that afternoon, Daniel followed her. She said she was going for a walk. Same excuse as always. But this time, he waited 10 minutes, then slipped out quietly, keeping a block's distance between them. Caroline walked like she had somewhere to be, not just wandering aimlessly. He trailed her down the cracked sidewalk, past the run-down liquor store, and the vacant lot with the rusted fence, until she turned into a small cafe tucked between a pawn shop and a payday loan center. Daniel stayed outside, waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then he saw him, tall, tan-skinned, wearing an expensive leather jacket and sunglasses that didn't belong in this neighborhood. The man walked into the cafe and didn't even hesitate, before leaning in and kissing Caroline on the cheek. Daniel's stomach turned. She laughed. She laughed like she hadn't in weeks, maybe months. And when the man sat down, she leaned in too, whispering, touching his hand across the table. Daniel's mouth went dry. He stepped back from the window, breathing hard, fists clenched at his sides. His ears rang with rage, disbelief, and something worse, confirmation. His worst fear was real. He didn't confront her, not yet. He walked back home, slower this time, dragging every step. His chest felt like it was closing in. The betrayal hadn't fully landed, but it was hovering above him like a storm cloud, waiting to strike. By the time Caroline got back home, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table pretending to go through job ads. "Good walk?" he asked without looking up. "Yeah," she said. "Got some fresh air." "Ran into anyone?" She hesitated for half a beat. "No, just walked around." A lie. A clean, smooth, well-practiced lie. Daniel stared at the newspaper in front of him, the words blurring together. His throat burned with the weight of everything he wanted to scream. But he didn't. He needed more than suspicion. He needed clarity. Over the next few days, he planned carefully. He took the dishwashing job for real, not because he needed money, but because it helped the illusion, and because it gave him time to think. Caroline kept leaving, same excuses, same perfume, same energy she never gave him anymore. And then came the final proof. One night she forgot her phone on the coffee table. It lit up with a message from someone saved as Jay. "Last night was amazing. Same time tomorrow?" Daniel stared at it for a full minute, his body frozen, blood pounding in his ears. He couldn't even feel his fingers anymore. She came out of the bathroom humming again. He quickly placed the phone back exactly where it was. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not because of anger anymore, but because of something worse, acceptance. She had moved on, emotionally, physically, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. She didn't miss him. She missed the lifestyle, the power, the illusion. And now that it was gone, so was her loyalty. The next morning, Daniel packed a small bag, told her he needed to go check on something job-related, and left. But instead of going to the diner, he went to see his lawyer. "I want a new will drafted," Daniel said, "one that cuts out my wife completely." Mason, the attorney, stared at him. "You're serious?" Daniel nodded. "I want everything. Redirected into a charitable trust, and I want it sealed until the time comes." "You sure about this, Dan?" Daniel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "More sure than I've ever been." Mason didn't ask any more questions. He'd known Daniel too long to doubt his instincts. The will was redrafted, the funds locked. Caroline would never see another dime. But Daniel didn't stop there. He had one more card to play. He returned home, acting like everything was normal. Kissed her on the cheek, asked how her day was. Listened as she lied to his face again. And that night, while she was asleep, he opened her purse and took a picture of her latest hotel keycard. Tomorrow he would follow her again, and this time he'd confront the truth with no way for her to hide. The next morning, Daniel didn't eat, didn't speak much, just watched Caroline move through the house like a ghost with lip gloss and secrets. She was humming again, not the tune of someone happy, but the careless melody of someone who knew she had options, who didn't think she had anything to lose. He told her he was going to a job interview a few miles away. She nodded like she didn't even care. "Good luck," she said, like she was talking to a stranger she'd met in passing. As soon as she left the house, dressed too sharp, makeup too perfect for a casual walk, Daniel grabbed his coat and followed. The sky was grey, clouds gathering like the story itself was about to crack open. He kept his distance, moving between parked cars and pretending to be on his phone when needed. Caroline caught a bus. She didn't know he was behind her, sitting 2 rows back in sunglasses and a cap. She never turned around once. 20 minutes later, she stepped off near a hotel, not some luxury resort like she was used to, but a clean, mid-range spot tucked off the highway. It wasn't romantic. It was hidden, functional, cheap enough to stay unnoticed. She walked in. He waited 5 minutes, then followed. Daniel walked through the lobby, heart pounding in his throat. His steps were slow, calculated. He wasn't just a husband anymore. He was a man walking toward a fire, knowing full well he'd get burned. The front desk clerk didn't look up. The elevator dinged once, and Daniel stepped in, pressing the button he saw on her keycard. Room 328. The hallway smelled like carpet cleaner and old cigarettes. Every step closer to the room made his stomach twist tighter. When he reached the door, he didn't knock. He used the keycard he'd taken a photo of and duplicated. It worked. The door clicked. He pushed it open slowly, and what he saw shattered. Something inside him so loud it was like glass breaking across the floor of his soul. Caroline wasn't just having an affair. She wasn't just with someone else. She was happy, laughing in bed with a man Daniel had never seen, shirtless, arms wrapped around her like they owned her. She was holding a glass of wine, her head thrown back in the kind of laughter Daniel hadn't heard in years, not even when they were still rich, not even before this test began. And that was the part that crushed him the most. Because it wasn't just betrayal, it was relief. She wasn't mourning his loss. She was celebrating her freedom from him. Caroline turned her head and froze. The man beside her sat up fast, confused, already defensive. Daniel didn't move. He just stood there in the doorway, staring at the woman he'd built a life for, sacrificed decades for, bled and burned for, and saw nothing familiar in her anymore. "Daniel," she gasped, scrambling to cover herself. The man got out of bed, fists up. "Who the hell are you?" Daniel laughed, a quiet, bitter sound. "I'm the husband. Who the hell are you?" "Babe, Caroline started. "Don't," Daniel cut her off. "Don't you dare lie to me again." She stood, wrapped in the hotel's thin white sheet, mascara smudged and mouth half open, But the performance was over. The mask she wore at home, cold, distant, bored, that was real. This version, the carefree lover, the warm woman, that wasn't for him. It never had been. "I thought you didn't care anymore," she said suddenly, voice trembling. Daniel blinked. "What? You stopped trying. You gave up on everything, on me. You let it all go. You let us fall." He stared at her, stunned. "You mean, when I pretended to lose everything to see if you'd still stand beside me, that's when I stopped trying?" She looked confused for a split second. "Pretended?" The man next to her looked equally lost. Daniel's voice dropped, cold and slow. "I didn't lose a thing, Caroline. Not the business, not the money, not the house. It was all a test, a fake collapse. I wanted to know who loved me, really loved me, and you failed." Silence swallowed the room. Caroline's face went white. The color drained so fast it was like someone flipped a switch. Her lips parted, then closed again, searching for the right words, the right lie. But there were none. Daniel took one last look at her, memorizing the stranger she had become. Then he left. He walked out of the room, out of the hotel, out of everything they had built together, because now he knew it had never been real, not the love, not the loyalty, just the lifestyle. He didn't cry, not yet. That would come later. First, he had something else to do, something even colder than walking out. He was going to make sure she never touched a cent of his world again. Daniel didn't go back to the apartment that night. He couldn't. He wouldn't. He wandered for hours through streets that felt too loud, too empty, all at once. Every corner reminded him of her laugh in that hotel room. Not the betrayal. He could stomach that. He'd seen worse in the business world. It was the joy, the ease, like she'd been waiting for the collapse just to jump ship. When the sun finally broke through the clouds the next morning, Daniel was sitting alone on a bench outside a bus station, phone in hand, scrolling through messages he never wanted to see again. He opened a photo, one from 5 years ago. Caroline, Mason, and Daniel smiling in front of their Christmas tree, matching pajamas, hot chocolate mugs, and a golden retriever, named Scout, that died last year. That was the picture they sent to their friends, the one that made people jealous, the one that meant nothing now. By noon, he was in his lawyer's office. "I want everything moved. I don't care how long it takes or what hoops we jump through. I want every asset protected under new trusts, new names, new paperwork. Nothing with her signature on it. She gets nothing." Mason, the attorney, nodded slowly. "You already cut her out of the will. You're sure you want to go this far?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm just getting started." He called his financial strategist next, then his real estate manager, then his security consultant. By sunset, Daniel had frozen every card, revoked every access code, removed her as a co-signer from all accounts. Caroline wouldn't know until she tried to buy her next overpriced latte or swipe into a spa. And when she did, she'd realize exactly what she'd gambled away. But Daniel wasn't doing it out of spite anymore. He was doing it to preserve what mattered, because somewhere beneath all the ashes of this betrayal, he still had one piece of his life worth saving, his son. Mason had been staying with a friend, untouched by all of this. Daniel hadn't told him the truth yet, hadn't decided how much he even deserved to know, but he had to face him now. Mason might have been selfish, entitled, a little too hungry for power, but he was still his blood. And Daniel needed to know if there was anything real left in that relationship. He called Mason to meet for lunch at a cheap burger joint Daniel used to go to as a teenager. He showed up in worn jeans and a faded hoodie, blending into the crowd. Mason looked out of place, clean-cut in designer sneakers and a crisp polo. "Dad," Mason asked, squinting as Daniel approached, "you look different." "Life'll do that to you," Daniel said, forcing a smile. They ordered food, sat in a sticky booth. For a while it was awkward silence between bites of lukewarm fries. Then Mason spoke. "Is it true? You lost everything?" Daniel stared at him. "What would it mean to you if I did?" Mason frowned. "I mean, it sucks, but we'll bounce back, right? You always do." "We? Well, yeah, I assume you've got a plan." Daniel leaned back, folding his arms. "What if I told you I don't?" That I'm broke. Flat out broke. And that there's nothing coming to you, no trust fund, no company to inherit, nothing. Mason's face dropped. Are you serious? Daniel watched him closely. Would you still care about me if I was? Silence. Long, painful silence. Then Mason sighed. Look, I'm not going to lie, it would suck. Like, really suck, but yeah, you're still my dad. I just don't know what that would even mean anymore. Daniel nodded slowly. That was more honest than he expected. Mason, he said quietly, have you ever earned $1 on your own? One that didn't come from my bank account? Mason looked down. Not really. You need to. What are you saying? I'm saying I've handed you everything your whole life, and I did it thinking I was giving you a head start, but I think I gave you a leash instead. Mason stared at him, unsure whether to be offended or scared. Daniel continued. I'm not leaving you nothing, but I'm not handing you a crown either. You want it? You work for it, just like I did. And just like that, Daniel got up and left. No long speech, no dramatic goodbye, just the cold truth. Life was no longer going to coddle his son. Back at the apartment, Caroline was waiting. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her suitcase was on the floor. She stood up as soon as he walked in. Where the hell have you been, she snapped. Daniel ignored her and walked to the kitchen. You cut me off, she said, voice rising. My cards aren't working. I called the bank and they said I was removed from everything. Are you serious right now? He poured himself a glass of water. Daniel, answer me. He turned around slowly, calm, hollow, unbothered. You cheated on me, he said, lied to me, disrespected me. I didn't cut you off, Caroline. You let go a long time ago. I'm just catching up. I thought we were over, she shouted, tears starting to rise now. You acted like you didn't care. You moved us into this dump and gave up on us. Daniel took a slow step toward her. You don't test love by giving more. You test it by taking everything away. And when I did, you left me. She wiped her face, mascara smearing again. You can't just erase me. I already have. Then he handed her an envelope. Divorce papers. Already signed. Caroline looked like she'd been slapped. You're ending this? After everything? Daniel gave a bitter smile. No, you ended it. I'm just closing the file. She didn't say anything at first. Caroline just stared at the papers in her hands, like they were written in another language. Her eyes flicked over the name of the attorney, the filing date, the highlighted signature line, Daniel Whitmore. Bold, unapologetic, final. Are you out of your mind? She finally said, voice shaking. You think you're going to divorce me and just walk away like none of this happened? Daniel stayed quiet. He knew this part. He'd seen it 1,000 times in hostile takeovers. Silence always rattled the guilty faster than shouting ever could. I gave you the best years of my life, she snapped. I stood by you, I raised your son, I supported your career, I dealt with your long hours and your emotional absence, and this is what I get. Daniel slowly sat down, looking at her with eyes that had nothing left to burn. You didn't stand by me, Caroline, you stood by the money. The difference is, the money never cheated on me. Her face crumpled, but the tears didn't fall. Not yet. Rage held them back. You humiliated me, she said through clenched teeth. You set me up, you let the world think we were ruined. You lied. He tilted his head. And what would you have done if I told you the truth? That I wanted to test your loyalty? You would have changed, faked it, said the right things, played the perfect wife. But what you did when you thought, I had nothing, that's who you really are. She opened her mouth again but closed it just as fast. Nothing she said now could undo what was done. He stood, slow and steady. You have 30 days to vacate this place. The house will go back into my name, the car's gone, the accounts are locked. I've arranged for a modest settlement, not out of kindness, but because I'm legally required, nothing more. This isn't over, she whispered, voice low and deadly. No, he agreed, now it's finally over. Daniel walked out again, not to cool off this time. This was final, permanent, but he wasn't out of the fire just yet. 2 days. Later he got the call from Mason. She's lawyering up. Daniel sighed into the phone. Of course she is. Not just that, she's threatening to go public, accuse you of abuse, emotional manipulation, fraud, claims you faked the bankruptcy to trap her. Daniel was quiet for a second. Let her try, he said. She won't win. Mason hesitated. Dan, you sure this'll get ugly headlines, lawyers, public sympathy, and she's good at playing the victim. Daniel looked out the window at the skyline. His skyline. He had fought tooth and nail to build this life. He wasn't about to let it crumble because someone else couldn't live without the illusion of wealth. I've got documentation, he said calmly. Security footage, witnesses, signed consent. On the fake business collapse from my internal team. The media won't buy it once they see the receipts. Still, the next week was hell. Articles started surfacing. Whitmore wife betrayed by billionaire husband in cruel loyalty test. Talk shows picked it up. Some called Daniel a genius. Others labeled him a monster. Social media turned it into a circus. Half the world admired his brilliance. The other half wanted his head on a stick. Caroline did interviews, cried on camera, claimed she'd been emotionally tortured and trapped in a toxic marriage with a man obsessed with control. Daniel didn't respond, not once. No statements, no press conferences, no interviews, just silence. And somehow the silence made people listen harder. Old friends, old business allies, some cut him off, but the real ones stuck. The ones who knew Daniel wasn't cruel, just calculating, the way he always had to be to survive. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about integrity. His company, still intact behind the scenes, continued thriving under a temporary name. When Caroline tried to demand half of the business, the court denied her. She wasn't on the books, never had been. Daniel had built walls around his empire long before she ever picked out her first designer purse. She walked out of court with her makeup ruined and her attorney whispering about appeals. Daniel walked out alone, free, and for the first time in years, he felt free. No more fake smiles, no more sleeping next to someone who secretly hated his silence, no more pretending. Everything was okay while rot ate away at the roots of his marriage. He went home, his home, the real one. The mansion she thought was seized. The accounts she thought were frozen. Everything was still there, untouched. He stepped into the foyer, breathed in the scent of fresh wood polish and clean marble, and for the first time in months, Daniel Whitmore smiled. But it wasn't over. Just yet, because Mason, the lawyer, called again that night. Your brother, he said carefully, we've got a problem. Daniel leaned against his kitchen counter, still in the clothes he wore to court, sipping whiskey that tasted like victory, but settled in his gut like dread. The call from Mason replayed in his head. Your brother. We've got a problem. He had barely spoken to Cole since the experiment began. On purpose. Daniel figured the silence would be revealing. And it had been. No calls, no check-ins, not even a damn, "You okay?" When the world thought Daniel had lost it all. Blood, but not loyalty. What kind of problem? Daniel had asked. Mason hesitated. He's selling information. Daniel's grip tightened around the glass. About me. About the business. About your personal life. Old client contacts, project leaks. He's been leaking stuff to a competitor. For weeks now, possibly even before the staged collapse. Daniel felt something cold settle into his chest. A slow, creeping numbness. He had raised Cole like a son, gave him a house when he couldn't afford rent, cleaned up his messes, paid his debts. Hell, Cole still had a car Daniel bought him outright. And this was how he paid it back. How solid is the evidence? Daniel asked. Solid enough for court, Mason replied. Emails, recordings, wire transfers. He's gotten over $80K wired to him from a shell company owned by one of your smaller rivals. Daniel didn't reply right away. It wasn't just betrayal. It was business espionage, theft, treason. He thought Caroline's knife in the back had dulled him to this kind of thing. But this one cut differently, deeper. Don't go to the police yet, Daniel said. I'll handle this. The next morning, Daniel drove to Cole's apartment, a smaller unit in a downtown high-rise he never should have been able to afford, without help. Daniel had signed the lease years ago, back when he still believed in family over paperwork. He knocked. It took a while, but Cole answered, wearing a t-shirt, boxers, and a guilty look that didn't match the casual act he tried to put on. "Danny?" he said, scratching his head. "Wow, man, haven't seen you in weeks. You all right?" Daniel didn't smile. "We need to talk." Cole stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was cluttered but expensive. A new flat-screen TV hung on the wall, and brand-new sneakers were lined up like a shrine by the door. Daniel sat, on the edge of the couch, didn't get comfortable. "You didn't reach out," he said, "not once when you thought I lost everything." Cole laughed nervously. "Man, I figured you needed space. I mean, who wants to be bothered when they're going through it, right?" Daniel's stare was flat. "Or maybe you didn't want to be around me when the money was gone." Cole frowned, walking to the fridge. "Don't start, bro. You know I always got your back." "Really?" Daniel asked. "Even when you're selling my clients' contact lists to my competitors?" The bottle of water slipped from Cole's hand and hit the floor with a thud. "What? Don't lie. Wait, who told you that?" "That's not true, man. I would never—" "I have emails, Cole, transfers, voice messages, your voice, selling trade secrets like it was candy. And the part that really stings? You didn't even do it to survive. You did it for stuff. New. TV's new shoes. What did they promise you? A promotion once I was out of the way?" Cole's jaw clenched, his whole act crumbling fast. "You left me behind, Daniel," he finally snapped. "You gave me scraps while you built a kingdom. I did everything for you, and you stopped giving a damn." Daniel blinked slowly. "I didn't stop. You stopped appreciating it. There's a difference. You always treated me like a charity case. No, I treated you like a brother." For a moment, the room fell heavy with silence. Then Daniel stood. "I'm cutting ties," he said. "Legal and personal. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon. The apartment, the car, the business favors, they're gone. You don't work for me anymore. You don't represent me anymore. As far as I'm concerned, you're just a man I used to know." Cole's face flushed red. "You think you're better than everyone, huh? That money makes you invincible." "No," Daniel said, "but it does let me choose who eats at my table, and you just took your last bite." He walked out, didn't he? Look back. Didn't need to. That door slammed behind him like a final chapter closing, but as Daniel got into his car, something inside him shifted. The pain didn't disappear, but it hardened into resolve. He wasn't just cutting off the rot anymore. He was starting over, with a new vision, a tighter circle, and a sharper sense of who he could trust. And maybe, just maybe, he'd still build something good, not because of the people he loved, but in spite of them. It had been nearly 6 weeks since Daniel walked out of Cole's apartment. 6 weeks of legal cleanup, media deflection, and soul-searching. He'd been working on rebuilding, not just the business, but himself. Quietly, away from headlines. A new office in a new city, under a temporary alias, surrounded by a hand-picked team of loyal people who had earned their way in. For the first time in years, Daniel was sleeping again. Not drugged-up exhaustion or alcohol-induced haze, but real, peaceful rest. No fake wife next to him. No leeches on the payroll. No traitors calling him brother. He'd even started volunteering. Quiet work, private stuff, soup kitchens, mentoring programs. He didn't do it for publicity. Hell, he didn't even want it to be known. It just felt right, like something good to plant in the scorched earth of what used to be his life. And that's where she found him. It was a Tuesday, rainy. The line for meals was long, and Daniel was in the back prepping trays when one of the volunteers tapped him on the shoulder. "Someone's asking for you." He turned around and saw her, Madeline, his ex-assistant, but not just any assistant. She'd worked for him back when the company was still in its prime, before he staged the collapse. Quiet, reliable, brilliant at her job, but always in the background. She'd resigned right before the scandal broke, saying she needed time away from corporate life. Daniel had thought nothing of it back then. Now she stood in front of him, soaked from the rain, hair clinging to her face, eyes serious. "We need to talk," she said. He stepped outside with her under the awning, confusion furrowing his brow. "Why now?" he asked. "It's been months." "I've been waiting," she said, voice low, "trying to figure out if I should say something, but I can't hold it anymore." He studied her face. Say what? She hesitated, bit her lip. Then finally, your wife wasn't the only one you were being tested by. Daniel froze. Madeline took a breath. Before I left, I had a meeting with Cole and Caroline, together. Daniel's stomach dropped. She continued. They approached me, wanted access to your schedule, your personal emails, insider info, said they were helping streamline things while you were going through your phase of burnout. Daniel blinked. My phase of burnout? Madeline nodded slowly. They knew about your doubts, about how you were getting suspicious of everyone. They said they were trying to protect the company by taking more control, but it didn't feel right. So I started digging. And, Daniel asked, voice tighter now, I found messages between them and a third party. Who? She glanced around before pulling a folded sheet of paper from her coat. A shell company registered in Dubai, funds being routed through it, Caroline's name on the transfer, and Cole's. They were working together, not just emotionally, financially. Daniel grabbed the paper, reading fast. It wasn't just an affair, it was embezzlement. While he'd been playing the puppet master in a loyalty test, they'd been playing him for a fool behind the curtain. They planned to force you out, Madeline said, make you look unstable, leak confidential info, fake a mental breakdown story to the board, have the company moved under emergency trusteeship. Then they'd slowly absorb your shares. Take control. Daniel's hands were shaking now. All this time, he'd thought he was the one orchestrating the test. But Caroline and Cole weren't just failing it, they were trying to flip it on him. They were ready to ruin you, Madeline whispered. Not just betray you emotionally, legally, financially, entirely. Daniel stared at the rain pounding the sidewalk. How did you find this? He asked. I kept backups, she said, because I didn't trust them, but I didn't trust you either, not back then. I didn't know if you'd believe me, and then when you disappeared, you thought I'd already lost, or I thought they won. Daniel's voice was like ice. They almost did. For a long moment, they stood there in silence. The city buzzed behind them, but in Daniel's world everything had gone quiet. Like a chess player staring down the board, realizing he'd almost been checkmated by people who were never even qualified to play. Then he looked at Madeline. Why are you really telling me this now? She met his eyes. Because I saw what they were doing and I should have said something sooner. But I didn't, and I've carried that guilt long enough. Daniel didn't say anything. He just tucked the paper into his coat and walked back into the building. That night he called Mason again. Pull every record, every document. I want to reopen the case. Not just the divorce, not just the fraud. I want criminal charges on both of them. Mason didn't hesitate. It's already in motion. And just like that, Daniel's quiet comeback shifted into something bigger, a reckoning. Because now he wasn't just walking away from betrayal. He was turning around, walking back through the fire, this time with gasoline in hand. 2 weeks later, Caroline and Cole received identical envelopes delivered by courier, thick, official. No return address, just a name embossed in gold, Daniel Whitmore. Inside was a formal court summons, charges of embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and breach of fiduciary trust. Attached were printed records, email transcripts, financial trails and voice logs. It hit them like a grenade. Caroline's lawyer immediately tried calling Daniel's firm. They were blocked. Cole tried reaching out directly. Texts, calls, even a voicemail where he sounded like he'd been crying. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. He already had what he wanted. He'd spent years building a machine so airtight, so layered, in legal armor and strategic structure, that not even the people closest to him could crack it. The moment he had real proof of betrayal, he simply activated protocols that had been sitting dormant for years, waiting for this exact moment. Mason filed the case, dropped it into the media's lap, and by morning the headlines were everywhere. Wife and brother of billionaire Daniel Whitmore face felony charges in multi-million-dollar scheme. Daniel didn't smile when he saw the news. He didn't toast with champagne. He didn't throw a party. He just stood at the window of his penthouse, hands in his pockets, watching the city lights flicker like they'd been waiting for this all along. The confrontation happened in a courtroom. Not the type you see in crime shows, no grand theatrics, just long tables, uncomfortable chairs, and legal firepower on both sides. Caroline and Cole sat across from Daniel for the first time since it all went down. Caroline looked thinner, pale, dressed like she'd tried to remember how sympathy worked. Cole looked bitter, hollow, not angry at what he'd done. Angry he got caught. Daniel sat between two of the most expensive attorneys on the East Coast. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. The judge called for a mediation meeting, not to drop the charges, but to negotiate the fallout before it turned into public execution. Caroline tried to speak first. "Daniel, please, we can fix this. We were confused, hurt. You made us think everything was collapsing. We panicked." Daniel raised a hand. She stopped talking. He looked her dead in the eyes. "You weren't confused. You were exposed." She blinked. "I loved you." "No," he said quietly. "You loved access to me. You loved what being my wife gave you. That's not love. That's branding." Cole leaned forward, trying to inject some of his old charm. "Bro, we're family. You're really going to put your brother in prison?" Daniel didn't blink. "You put yourself there." "But we were scared, man. You were slipping. We thought maybe you were losing control." "I was losing trust," Daniel interrupted. "And instead of helping me find it, you tried to steal everything you could carry." The room went cold. The mediator finally spoke. "Mr. Whitmore, are you willing to consider a settlement?" Daniel smiled. A slow, haunting smile. "Oh, I'm offering one." He slid a folder across the table. Caroline opened it. Her face fell. Cole leaned in, then swore under his breath. It was a plea deal, but not the kind they expected. Caroline would receive nothing, no alimony, no shares, no cash, not even the jewelry Daniel had gifted her, because every single item had been under the company name. She would be left with the clothes on her back, a modest apartment in a low-income neighborhood, and a public record of attempted corporate theft. Cole would lose everything Daniel had ever put his name on: the apartment, the car, the residual, contracts. In exchange for not pressing full federal charges, Daniel would allow him to walk, but blacklisted, bankrupt, and humiliated. Caroline's voice trembled. "You really hate us that much?" Daniel shook his head. "No. I just finally see you." Cole slammed his fist on the table. "You think you're better than everyone just because you made it big. You think this makes you some kind of hero." "No," Daniel said, "it makes me free." They signed the documents, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. And just like that, it was done. Months passed. The headlines faded. The story got buried under newer scandals, fresher gossip. But for Daniel, life had never been clearer. He lived quieter now, simpler. No personal assistants, no gold-digging dinner parties, no hollow anniversaries, just peace. He met with Madeline once more, over coffee. She offered to come work for him again, under better terms, more independence. He smiled and said maybe, but he also asked her how she was doing. She blinked, surprised. "I'm better," she said. "Thank you." "You did the right thing," Daniel said, "even if it took time." Then he left her with a sealed envelope, a generous thank you tucked inside a trust fund under her name. He never asked for praise, never wanted credit. Daniel Whitmore just wanted truth. And in the end, that's exactly what he got. Brutal, ugly, shattering truth. But it set him free. And when you're free, you don't need revenge, you just need peace, and the strength to never let poison back in your house again.